I'd like to call to order the Administrative Committee meeting for December 8th, 2017. And I'd like to open it with discussion items 1 through 8. How about, do we have any travel to approve?
No, sir.
Or in or out of the?
None.
Okay, are there any questions by any of my colleagues or the public on the January 5th, 2018 board agenda? Hearing none. We do have one board member consultant.
Chairman Burr, there is a question here.
I'm sorry?
There is a question here.
Oh, I got it.
Harvey,
Yes.
come up.
All right.
Harvey Etter is here.
Hello there.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Eder.
Yeah, Harvey Etter for myself and the Public Solar Power Coalition. Again, exposing my ignorance. I'm not sure what you're referring to about. I mean, are we approving of all of this coming before the board in the meeting in January? Because I'm contending certain issues, and I just saw this yesterday late afternoon and early evening. So I want that to be known. I'm not sure if I should bring it up now or when it's
We're only
appropriate.
approving the agenda.
Okay,
We're not talking the substance of the agenda items.
okay. Well, I'm thinking that there's issues that need to be brought back to the next meeting. Anyway, that's my call.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Harvey.
Dr. Burke,
Thank you.
on agenda item number 5, there actually, although it says no motion required, there actually is a motion that's required to approve a change in compensation for Dr. Parker's board assistant.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Would the clerk call the roll?
Vice Chair Benoit,
Aye.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Aye.
Dr. Parker,
Aye.
Dr. Burke,
Yes, aye.
motion passes 4-0.
Okay, then, Mr. O'Kelly?
Good morning.
Are you there?
Yes.
Are you out on your short timer stick?
Don't believe everything Derek says, Dr. Burke. Where's he at? No, I'm
You know, Derek stays on your case, man.
yeah, I know. He told me. Good morning,
But we're
Dr.
all
Burke.
coming down, the whole district's coming down to Fullerton. And we're gonna sit in at every city council meeting and it's gonna be hell to pay, I'll tell you that.
My best friend from high school lives there. I'll be there.
Oh, boy. I'll try to stay on my game, Dr. Burke, and see. This item, Dr. Burke and committee members, thank you. I'm going to defer the presentation on this item to Ron Moskowitz. He's the ADO over IM. Him and his staff been doing a tremendous job getting these projects going. So I'm going to go ahead and let him talk about some of these IT things that are moving forward.
Good morning, Dr. Burke, members of the committee. I'm Ron Moskowitz, ADEO of Information Management. Everything is moving forward pretty well. We're moving right along. Our new and improved website is almost ready to go live. We sent out a link for the governing board members and the assistant to review it and to provide some comment. After about a week, we're looking to provide a link onto our old website for the public to kind of get a preview of the new website and solicit any feedback from them, and then just go live with our new website. So things are moving very well. On our EGIS project, by now we were hoping to complete 3 of the 9 projects by the end of the fiscal year, and we actually completed 4 of the 9. So we are definitely on schedule there. We have 5 left, and we will be completing them by the end of the fiscal year. We have an IT review that we kicked off, and we received a draft report from the vendor this week, and my staff and I finished reviewing it last night. I will be working with the vendor to finalize the report and then schedule a meeting with the vendor to present the findings. All of our other projects, again, are moving along pretty well, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? No motion is required on this, is receive and file. And I erred, Kurt, because under board member concerns, I have asked Mayor Benoit to serve as a special consultant to the chair to help me out in the Riverside, San Bernardino, Palm Springs area, because driving from the west side down there all the time is a little tough. And since he has spent these past years as vice chair, he has an intimate knowledge of what's going on there. I'd like to get from you, I know it's not an agendized item, so we can't discuss it today, but I would like for you to put together what I need to do to implement this by the January board meeting.
Okay. I will do so, Dr. Burke.
Or if it needs, okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item 8. Oh, no, item
There's an item 7, Dr. Burke. I've got a pension status update that was requested by Councilwoman Mitchell and also seconded by Dr. Liu. This information that we're going to provide is as timely as it can be. The SB Sarah Pension Board met yesterday and approved their actuarial valuation information for next fiscal year. So this is 20-hour-old information here, as timely as it can get. So I'll start, again, I guess just reminder on our pension plan. Our pension plan is a defined benefit pension plan. And so there are calculations that are used to pretty much promise a benefit to an employee upon retirement, upon meeting certain criteria. Those benefits are not based on the actual dollars that the employee ever paid into the system or what the employer paid into the system. The goal is to make those dollars equal what's paid out, but that doesn't always happen, and that's why you hear about pension liabilities. What's been promised and what's been paid out is greater than the assets that have actually accrued during that time frame. And so that's the nature of a defined benefit pension plan, whether it's a 2 at 55 formula or a 1 at 99 formula. When you're guaranteeing a benefit based on investment performance and things of that nature, if those things don't come true, you'd always have a shortfall. And so the one thing you start always looking at is mortality rates change, but not too much. Salaries change, not too much. They're pretty close to expectations, but the volatility that's introduced into these defined benefit plans is really in the investment assumption and the actual performance of those investments. And so if you look at SB Sarah, they had a great year for fiscal year 16-17. They earned 13.4%. Most of the other pension plans, we look at CalPERS, OSERS, LaSera, all kind of in that same range. You'll see there's a black line that goes across the chart there. That's really their hurdle rate. And so when we say they have a great year and they earned 13.4%, their target was 7.5. What that really means is 7.5 would just mean they hit the mark. The great part is the extra roughly 6% on top of that. But also if you look at the year before when they were roughly negative 1%, that really means they were negative 8.75. We needed them to earn 7.75. They didn't, and they actually lost 1%. And so you have to remember that anything under that line is really almost a zero to you. It's like setting a goal to run a mile at 6 minutes and you run it at 7 minutes. Well, that might be a decent mile run. If you're shooting for 6, it doesn't help you. So you look at this investment performance, and it kind of looks like the pluses and minuses wash out if you look at it from a 0% line. But if you look at it from the black line, you look at how much blue is above the black line and how much space you have below the black line, you can kind of start to see that there's a lot more below that line than there is above. And so what that does ends up causing a liability. And so if you look at the next slide here shows the unfunded actuarially accrued liability for San Bernardino County Employees Retirement System. we have roughly about approximately 8 to 10% of our assets and liabilities of their plan. So our financial statements showed we had about a $200 million liability. There's some timing difference, but that roughly lines up with their $2.5 billion. We're about 8% of that lines up. And now that liability, you'll see, why did it jump so significantly in 16-17? They had a great year. They earned 13.4%. The reason being is they changed their actuarial assumptions going forward last year. They had been assuming they would earn 7.5% till the end of time. Now they assume they're going to earn 7.25% to the end of time. The problem is just they've been assuming that higher number for the last, and higher than that since 1930 something. And so when you all of a sudden change midstream, you realize you haven't been putting in as much money as you should have. The investment returns didn't come in where you thought they were going to be. You're now predicting they're not going to come into the future where you thought they were going to be, and therefore your liability increases. So the question that usually comes up is, you have a pension liability, it's high, what are we doing to fix this? What are we doing to pay down the liability? And so what the governing board here has done in the past is issued pension obligation bonds, here's a $10 million check to fund some of that liability. But that's really on top of a funding mechanism that's already ongoing. And so I'll move to I'll talk about the funded ratio before I move to how you're funding the pension liability. The funded ratio still, so you see $2.5 billion, that looks like a really bad net pension liability. That's on liabilities of about $12 billion and assets that are about $9.5 billion. So the shortfall is the $2.5 billion. That gives you a funded ratio of about 78.7%, 79%. A healthy pension plan is generally regarded at being 80% or above. Our pension plan is equal to or slightly above most of the other pension plans we look at. Right in line, if not a little bit better. Now, so when the pension plan says, hey, we've got a liability, we've got to pay for it, the actuarial valuation they use, there's a lot of mechanisms in there. There's smoothing mechanisms and then funding periods for which you pay off any new liabilities. But it really comes down where the rubber meets the road is the contribution rates. You're going to have to pay more money. But there's an interesting facet with these defined benefit plans is the way they're written, at least in the state of California. So this is the employee contribution rate. And I'm going to use fiscal year 2009, 2010. That's when I got here. So I'll use that as a starting point. You can see the average employee contribution rate was 9.4%. Now you saw a bunch of years where I'm saying there's a huge liability increase, and so you would think that there might be a huge increase in contribution rates. But there is, it's just not on the employee side. So when you look at the employee contribution rate, on average, depending on entry age, it's only gone from 9.4 to 9.7 next year. It's barely increased at all. You'll see the red bars show what the PEPRA employees pay on an employee contribution rate. So they get a lesser benefit and they pay a lesser employee contribution rate. The reason these rates don't go up is because these are only based on mortality figures, and the key part is they're only based on the investment assumption. Actual investment losses, the liability that relates to those losses, are not borne in any way by the employee, not directly. They're only borne by the employer. And so you'll see the employer contribution rates. This is the answer to the question of how you're paying off your pension liability. So you're paying off your pension liability. Every year they run an actuarial evaluation. They figure out whether there was more or less money than they expected. They smooth that in over 5 years. And if there's a liability, you pay that off over 20 years. So you'll see the employer contribution rates in that same period. For fiscal year 09-10, they were 15.2%. Next fiscal year, they're going to be 40.3%. So a significant increase. Any investment returns, any changes in investment assumption, any mortality changes, and an increase in liability are being paid for primarily by the employer, with some a little bit by the employee as well. So the funding mechanism is aggressive. If somebody says we need to pay off this pension liability, what I would say to the governing board is you're paying it off in an aggressive fashion. You were paying about $10 million a year when I got here. Next year you're going to be paying $30 million a year. And that number is projected to stay the same, even assuming they earn 7.25%, will probably stay that way for another 5 to 12 years before it starts to come back down. So I think at this point what I've described is how does pension plan work, Where's the liability at? Who bears the brunt of paying off that liability? What do the numbers look like? The question then comes up, should we do something different? My recommendation would be pension obligation bonds don't help. Cutting additional checks to chase a liability that's just continuing to grow. The $10 million that you cut a check there is probably more useful here in helping you manage short-term needs than it is to fund in 1 year what can go up $50 million on the liability side. It doesn't make a significant impact. Probably the real fix, if you get to a big picture, Dr. Burke, I think, mentioned it before. This is an issue that not just occur here at SCAQMD. It's at every city, county, school district, special district, state agency. The only way at this point I think you bring that liability down is you continue to pay extremely high contribution rates and or you change benefit formulas for existing employees going forward. And I mean, you can't do that right now. So, but that would be a way to, I mean, they're just numbers. I don't mean that any offense to me or anybody sitting here. But from a numbers perspective, that's what you do. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
My question initially is, what are other state agencies doing about it?
So Dr. Burke, on the surface, they're paying their contribution rates. They're paying increased contribution rates. And so the district and you and the district and the committee are being diligent to see what should we be doing. And in reality, the retirement plans have a vested interest in making you pay that liability as fast as possible. And that's what they're doing. They're increasing your contribution rates and requiring you to pay more and more money to the pension plan. You know, and of course, it's without regard to the operational effect because that's not their responsibility. They're fiduciaries of a pension plan. And so what you see, Dr. Burke, other agencies and other state, local governments is paying higher contribution rates. There's a change in pension formulas back in 2013 that you can see hasn't done much. The next item is you do see negotiated differences, such as the things the district done, where employees pay their full employee contribution rate. The next thing that you see out there is agencies where employee pays the full employee contribution rate and also through negotiations pays part of the employer contribution rate as well. Beyond that, the district's ability to even sit down and negotiate to use a different pension formula is not allowed by current law. The district pursued legislation 4 or 5 years ago to try to allow that, and it didn't go anywhere. So I don't know if anybody else wants to share anything else they see. That's generally what's going on, Dr. Burke, and the agencies that I look at to see what's happening.
So let me ask, what is our formula?
So our pension formula here is called the 2 at 55 formula. So if you retire at the age of 55 and you have 30 years of service, you retired, you would receive 60% of your pensionable compensation. So you take 30 years times that 2%. If you wait until you're 64 to retire, it's actually 3% for every year of service. So if you worked for 30 years and you retired or waited to retire till you're 64, you'd be at 90%. The reason being there is the amount of payments at 55, you're probably going to receive that 60% for a long time before you pass away. If you wait until you're 64, it's a much more condensed time frame. So theoretically, it should be about the same number of dollars that go out the door.
Do we ever track that and see if that proves out? Or?
Well, so that's part of the actuarial evaluation process. They consider mortality rates. And so one of the things that does drive rates up is when the actuaries look at the mortality tables that are in existence. They change those to the more updated tables. And as you can imagine, those tables generally show longer lifespan for participants in these plans, which means more liability and more money that needs to be put in that was otherwise unexpected.
And do our employees pay their share? We don't pay it for them.
No, so all employees at the district starting back in late 2012 pay the full employee contribution rate.
And do we pay any interest to the pension plan on the liability?
So the liability includes interest that they were otherwise supposed to have earned. So the answer is yes.
And what is that rate?
It would be at the same discount rate of 7.25%.
Even if they don't earn it that year?
Yeah, so the liability assumes that every dollar they don't have, whether they didn't earn it for whatever reason, they don't have a dollar, their assumptions are all blown out because they assume they'd have the dollar and they assume they were going to earn 7.25 on it. So if they don't have the dollar, you owe them the dollar and you owe them the 7.25 that they would have otherwise earned as well. So that's factored into the liability already. I think maybe where you go with this is, well, why don't you issue a bond that pays 5% interest and give it to the retirement system? And could you put the presentation back up? And so you can do that, but what you're really doing is sort of a doubling down on the assumption that they're going to actually earn 7.25%. So they haven't done it for, over the last like a 10-year basis. So now you're really making the assumption that some reason they're going to do it in the future. So you're going to pay somebody 5.25. You assume that they're going to earn on the cash you give them, and you're going to save on the interest they otherwise would have charged us. But if I think I've discussed in some of the budget hearings before, let's pretend we would have issued a $100 million pension obligation bond in 2007, 2008, sent the $100 million to SB Sarah. Within 2 years, you would have only had $70 million there. So you'd owe the bond payment at 5.25. You now owe another $30 million to SB Sarah for assets that they lost. So I think you can run the numbers to make it make sense if you believe that they're going to earn that rate. Otherwise, I think you run the risk of losing the whole point in actually doing it. And it's at a point now where even the Government Finance Officers Association has a best practice that pleads for you to recommend to your governing boards that this is probably not something that you want to do. It doesn't really solve the problem at all. It just adds another degree of volatility. You can argue it the other way.
Well, actually, my city we took a private bond and at a much lower rate. And then you get that difference between the 7.2% or whatever it was at the time we did it and the rate you're paying on your private bond. We didn't issue, we didn't issue public bonds. We did privately with a bank. So it's just something I don't know, maybe you're right, it doesn't make sense to do that.
And the district's still paying off bonds from 1995 and bonds from 2004 as well. And I know at one point in time I'd run some numbers to see if it had worked through. I think the 95 were about even. At the time I ran the numbers, the 04 we were in the red on those.
It only makes sense if you're getting a really low rate on your bond. And we were at the time we did it, so, but if it's 5%, it's not that much of a difference. Okay.
Well, let me ask a question. I didn't hear you say that we are funding less than the amount that we are supposed to be contributing.
No, Dr. Parker, we're funding what we are required to fund. And I would say the pension plan has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that plan is fully funded in a timely manner. They take it just as seriously as the employer, and I wouldn't say more seriously, but they have a fiduciary responsibility to do that. If it were up to them, they would say, we need $200 million today because there's not enough cash. They use some of these mechanisms that are actuarially approved to lessen that burden to some degree, but they are significantly increasing the contribution rates to cover the liability, and the district is required to pay those contribution rates and does, and has done things to ensure that the district's able to continue making those contributions.
So the difference itself is really the yield, what was anticipated 7.25 versus the 2 or 3% that they have basically earned during certain years. So we only have that difference as really that of a liability because we've been funding the amount that we should have actuarially. Is that correct?
Yes, but Dr. Parker, so I mentioned a little bit about some of the funding mechanisms. And so when they have a liability increase in 1 year, they don't require us to pay off that new liability the next year. They smooth, so can you open that presentation again? Any dollar amount that's above or below that target line gets smoothed in over a 5-year period. So let's just use 16-17 as an example. They did They did 6% better than what the line said. We don't get the credit for the full 6% all in the next year. That's smoothed in over a 5-year period. By the same token, the year before when they lost 1%, we're really short 8.75%. They don't require us to pay that additional liability. They smooth that in over 5 years. The reason being is these are measurement periods. Somebody decided June 30 is a good date to measure investment performance, and it's to over a 5-year period to sort of recognize a little bit longer business cycle than just 1 year. And so they don't, otherwise you'd have contribution rates that are 1 year they're 90%, the next year they're 5%. And local government agencies, live and die on their ability to have smooth funding streams and smooth costs. So the answer is yes, but there is a smoothing process. And even when they finally recognize that full liability, you're paying it off over a 20-year period. And again, the reason is to smooth those costs out while still requiring the current generation of all of us here to pay the burden of those costs.
If we floated a bond, would it be tax exempt?
It would probably be tax exempt. It depends on how you could. There's benefits to doing them both ways, but you could float a tax exempt bond.
So that would basically give a yield, a cost less than what we would basically have as a difference.
So Dr.
What the year?
Dr. Park, there's always, the answer could be yes, and then the answer could be no. It would be a third outstanding bond that the district has. I would just personally, this will be my last administrative committee, and so I guess my answer would be possibly. I wouldn't recommend it, considering that there's tens of millions of dollars of outstanding bonds currently out there, and that it hasn't necessarily played out well for the district. I can give you an example. In 2006, I worked at SB Sarah. 2008, one of the two, and the district cut a $10 million check to SB Sarah to help pay down the liability. And the next year, the contribution rates went up. And my predecessor, Rick Pierce, I remember calling saying, what the H, we just gave you a $10 million check 2 months ago and our contribution rates just went up. And my response was, well, they would have gone up more if you hadn't given us the $10 million. And I think the $10 million probably would have been better put to use at the district to help smooth things out than sending over to SB Sarah. So I'm sorry, Dr. Parkers, you didn't ask for my opinion part of it. The short answer is yes, possibly.
I
understand. Okay. We
So we-
won't,
So we already
it's a
have two
conversation we
bonds.
can have in more depth.
We already have 2 bonds outstanding. I think the concern would be you don't want to keep bonding on top of your bonds. At a certain point, that doesn't make any sense. You're just accumulating more debt and more problems. So I agree with what you've said there. We already have 2 bonds out. I don't think I'd file on more.
Agree.
When I came here, this was a problem. I've been here 25 years, it's still a problem. And when I leave, I'm sure the problem will still remain. My question has always been the same thing. What happens when they call up and say they want all this money and they want to up our ante? What happens if they call one day and we don't have the money?
So
What
Dr. Burke,
happens that day?
Dr. Burke, there's an example. The city of San Bernardino filed for bankruptcy about 4 or 5 years ago and stopped paying their contributions to CalPERS. CalPERS then said, that's fine, but when we run out of money, we're not paying your retirees, the people that are already retired, people that may have retired 40 years earlier. And then I think they worked it out in whatever means they worked it out, as if CalPERS was a creditor in that process, although legally they may not technically meet the definition of a creditor, but that same type of relationship. They had to figure something else out and get back to paying their full contributions. But the threat was to just stop paying the retirees.
There's a small city in Northern California that has had that happen and their retirees lost their benefits. And it was only like 10 or 12 employees, but you know, a small city currently has like 2 employees. They used to have 5, but all of the past employees lost their benefits because they stopped paying their check. So it does happen. PERS will cut you off.
I'm glad I don't have any benefits coming.
It rarely happens. It rarely happens.
It's very rare, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that presentation, Mr. O'Kelly.
Thank you.
Item number 8 would be Dr. Fine.
Thank you, Chairman Burke, members of the committee. Good morning. This is a very brief item. When we amended Regulation 3 for fees last year, we converted some of the text to a table format. A small piece of language was omitted in that process. So this is just an administrative change to actually restore our authority to charge for the preparation of notices for projects that require notification. It will allow us to recover, as we have been in the past, between $75,000 and $125,000 a year. It's just an administrative fix to that error that was made. It doesn't need to be a set hearing, no 30-day docs. It's just a administrative fix to the rule.
I'll move the item.
Second?
Mr. Weiss?
No motion.
Oh,
Mr. Weiss?
Yes, Dr. Burke?
How does this match up with the no increase in fees thing from the state?
I don't, is your question, Dr. Burke, whether restoring this item would constitute a fee increase?
I'm on Prop 26, right?
Are people going to pay more money?
Well, it's, I think there's an argument that they won't pay more money than they should have.
As a practical matter, Dr. Burke, the sources that are subject to this rule have been paying the fee because it was always in the rule before and they understood that it was a requirement. And so by restoring this language, we're really not increasing the fee to anybody. But we're clarifying the existing authority.
How long has this been not in place?
It's just been a matter of a few months.
Since the amendments in last year, so it took effect July 1st. Oh, this year, sorry.
Okay, I'm
5
good.
months.
I'll accept a motion on this.
There's no vote required, Dr. Burke.
No motion.
That's interesting. How can you have a fee that deals with money put back on the books without a vote?
Dr. Burke, it'll go to the governing board for their consideration. So the board will vote on it.
Committees just don't.
But committees, as a
Okay.
practice, committees haven't voted on rulemaking.
Okay. Item number 9.
Chairman Burke, I don't have a financial interest, but I'm required to identify for the record that I'm a board member of the California Air Resources Board, which is involved in this item.
Good morning, Dr. Burke and members of the committee. This is actually a substantial resource request, but it's required because of 2 significant bills that passed the legislature last year. The first was AB 617, which, as you know, is a companion bill that accompanied the extension of the state's greenhouse gas cap and trade program. We are getting significant funding through AB 109. We're getting $10.7 million for the first year implementing this program. It's very important that we get the resources and the staff in place to start the work, because that way we can show the legislature that we're really making significant efforts, and they'll be more likely to extend the funding for future years. AB 617 has a lot of parts to it. It accelerated the barked work that we're largely doing for reclaim, but it moved up the timetable extensively. So a lot of the staffing requests will initially be working on rules. We have to identify communities and environmental justice areas that are burdened by air toxics and other pollutants. There's significant monitoring after those communities are identified. Some of those communities will need specific emission reduction plans. And then there are statewide clearinghouses that we're participating in for backed and barked, and also an effort to try and improve the consistency of statewide reporting. So all of these things are going to layer a lot of additional work to AQMD, and so that's the nature of the request. The board letter lays out specific resource needs. The staffing for AB 617 is 36 and a half full-time equivalents. We've got a half of an office assistant that's going to be on the other program I'll talk about in a moment. $400,000 for some equipment maintenance contracts, and about $2.35 million for a lot of equipment, because we're going to need to beef up our lab and our analysis capabilities. The other aspect of this resource request has to do with AB 134. And this is actually really good news because we got a stream of $107.5 million for this year, and that will be an ongoing stream in the future. And that's to enhance and augment the Carl Moyer projects. We get up to 6.25% of that funding every year for administrative costs.
Jill, on the
Yes.
107.5, that's not guaranteed. That was a one-time
Yes.
appropriation.
Wayne
You said
is-
it was ongoing.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, the 107.5 for Carl Moyer is ongoing. No, I'm so sorry, I messed it up. Okay, we got $107.5 million for the Carl Moyer. We can use up to 6.25% of that. So for the first year, that's $6.7 million. And so most of that funding would go towards additional staffing. I apologize for misspeaking. We anticipate that when we bring the budget back in 6 months or so, we will have additional FTE requests, but this will get us a huge start on both of these projects. And so there's a number of recommendations that are spelled out in your board letter. I also want to point out there were some changes we sent to the admin committee. The public has copies there. We made some slight changes to some of the staffing recommendations, but the recommended actions are to recognize up to the $10.7 million upon receipt from CARB, which we may get in this month or next month, so it's coming right away. And appropriate $5,644,888, which is funny because it's so specific. That goes into the fiscal year 17-18 budget. And there's tables 1 through 5 in the board letter that show how that's distributed. We're requesting authority for the executive officer to issue solicitations and purchase orders for items listed in tables 3 and 5. And we would authorize the executive officer to amend certain contracts for services and supplies as listed here in item 3. Approve addition of 36.5 positions for AB 617. If there's any unspent revenue received from CARB, we would want to account for that as going to the restricted general fund balance. And then for AB 134, approving 10.5 positions for that program and transfer and appropriate funds, $561,792 for that implementation to the 17-18 budget general fund. So we're seeking a support for those recommendations. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any comments by any of my colleagues?
What, I have one question. What is the total amount that all of these add up to, if you have that number handy?
If you add it up, and this is for this first fiscal year, it's $400,000 for the contracts, about $2.35 million for equipment, some other contracts and related supplies, and the staffing comes out to, where did I put that number? Okay, the staffing for AB 617, I have to add those two numbers. The staffing is about $500,000 for that, and 2.9, so it's roughly $3.5 million for the staffing. And then for the AB 134, it's about $561,000 for the staffing for that one.
And this is all new, this, right now, we're going to be adding this amount of staff.
Yes. It'll take us a while to staff up. We're likely to reassign some existing staff to start working. We already have done that, to start working on the program, but then we'll have a lot of holes to fill for those resources.
A motion is required for this, correct?
I'll move approval.
Bert?
Yes, Dr. Burke.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk call the roll?
Vice Chair Benoit?
Aye.
Councilmember Mitchell?
Yes.
Dr. Parker?
Yes.
Dr. Burke?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Item 10.
Good morning, Dr. Burke, members of the committee, Philip Klein again. This item, you have the board letter, and you also have a PowerPoint presentation as a way of summary. I have the PowerPoint loaded if you would like, or I could just give a brief, I'll just go forward with a brief verbal summary. So as many of you know, we have, and if you look in the board letter, there's a significant amount of money sitting in a lot of special funds that the district has accumulated over the years, either through settlement agreements, through mitigation funds set up by rule, or other agreements with other agencies. And there's about 11 to 12 funds that have different restrictions, but they are essentially meant to get emission reductions within our jurisdiction to help achieve, our AQMP goals and other goals. And so the funds range anywhere from, the largest fund is about 29 million all the way down to about 200,000. And so the approach here, and there is a desire to not have this money accumulate and to spend it, and to spend it in cost-effective and ways of improving our air quality. So rather than have a separate program for each fund and all the restrictions, the approach we're proposing is to do a very broad-based request for proposals to get a large amount of proposals in a lot of different areas in, and see what's out there in terms of incentive programs. And if you remember back to the AQMP, we identified the $1 billion per year need. We also talked about, while we have a lot of programs doing mobile source incentives, we wanted to start doing some stationary source incentives as well. And so this is an opportunity, because these funds aren't restricted to mobile sources like a lot of the funds we get from the state. The RFP will be open to mobile sources. We want to see those projects too, but as you'll see in the types of projects we have listed as examples, that we're looking at a lot of different stationary source type projects that can get emission reductions. And this will get us on the path to having more of an ongoing program for stationary source incentives, just like we already do for mobile source incentives. Once those projects come in and they're evaluated, we can match them with the appropriate fund and the appropriate restrictions on the fund based on the project. So we think this is the most efficient way to spend these funds down, spend them in the most efficient way, cost-effective way, and really kick off what we hope in the future is more of a permanent stationary source incentive program. But again, we are open to innovative mobile source projects as well, and they'll be evaluated according to the criteria in the RFP as provided to you. I will mention one change we plan to make to the RFP is we do give extra points for environmental justice areas. We were going to use, initially we were looking at the definition we have used for Carl Moyer, but we plan on expanding that to using Cal EnviroScreen as an OR, just to bring in more projects. The schedule's laid out for you. So one action is to release this RFP. Obviously, we will come back to the board with our proposals and recommendations, and the board will be making the final decision on the projects that are funded. This is on the same scale of the AB 1318 process that we had in Coachella Valley, so it will be quite an effort. We hope to get a lot of good projects in. In addition, there's a couple projects that we feel are ripe now that we don't need to wait for the RFP. One of the funds is really directed towards mobile sources. We have mobile source programs now. So one of the actions is to transfer about $4.4 million into kind of our mobile source funds now, just to get that spent along the lines of how we spend that in Carl Moyer and other programs. So that's one of the actions. The final action is we were approached by a nonprofit that's doing low-income energy efficiency projects in disadvantaged communities, Build It Green. They have multi-millions of dollars from the state to do this project. And they're going into homes and doing energy efficiency. So we've been talking to them about what types of technologies could they include in their program that would also get us NOx reductions. And after several months of talking, what we decided was that looking at solar thermal water heating was one that we can just provide an additional rebate to them for every solar thermal system that they put in. Makes it cost effective for us. They're out there anyway. They're doing the outreach. And so about $615,000 we'd like to put towards that, for this rebate program to this nonprofit. So when they're out there assessing these homes, we can help tip the scales and make it more cost effective for the solar hot water heating. And it's a small amount to start, but if it works out, we'll come back to the board and report on it and maybe request some additional funding. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'd like to know more about this company that we're giving $615,000. So who runs this?
So Build It Green is an administrator of the state's low-income weatherization program. Again, there's this statewide program for residential energy efficiency, and we're not giving them $615,000. We're essentially paying them on a per-project basis. If they're already going into homes, they're doing a full home assessment to make it as energy efficient as possible. But they have to go by certain cost-effectiveness criteria for energy efficiency. And when we talk to them, it's hard to make solar thermal, which has NOx benefits because you don't need to have a hot water heater. It's on their list of things to do, but it's not going to be done as much as maybe we would like because it's not going to hit their thresholds for efficiency and cost. But we think with like a $500 or so rebate, we can tip the scale and do more. So they have a very large grant. I think it's through, which state agency was that? The Sustainable Communities? What was it? Sorry?
Community Services Development?
CSD, Community Services Development. I think the money originally came from GGRF funds several years ago. So this would
How
be
much is it?
Their grant, their original grant, was it
Yeah, you say it's a lot of money. How much is a lot of money?
25 million overall? That's statewide.
Yeah, but then in 42% of the state, which we represent population-wise, we're giving them 615,000, which is about 15% of their total grant.
But it's just specifically for one piece, the solar thermal.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I'm all for solar thermal. You know, I got my hot water tank fixed yesterday, and I'm amazed. Hot water tanks, when I was a kid, hot water tanks were $40. They're now $2,000. I can't believe that.
Can we restrict it?
But it's not clear to me
It is only our district.
the 615,000 is doing.
So it is restricted to only our district, as committee member Mitchell just asked. What it's going to do is, again, they go into these homes, they say, okay, we're going to do weatherization. That's going to be good for energy efficiency. We're going to get you energy efficient appliances. That's good. We're going to do all these other things that are going to get energy efficiency benefits. Those are all good things. We wanted to try to tip the scale towards some NOx reductions with a small amount. They may be spending $10,000 per home. We're just hoping to tip the scale for solar thermal with maybe a little bit additional to help that. This is a right program. They're doing it now. We thought maybe we could get started quickly. If the committee feels like we want to run them through the RFP process, that's absolutely okay too, and it would open it up to others. But this is the type of project that we wanted to start getting into when we get into residential NOx reductions.
And this is targeted at low-income communities? And solar thermal is not
Right. Okay.
So do we have someone who wants to speak?
Yeah. So staff is reminding me, a solar thermal installation is about $3,500. We're just giving them an extra $500 to help make it attractive.
Forcing them to pay $3,000.
Right.
Okay, I'm good. I'm good.
It's really a $500 per house
Incentive.
incentive, not necessarily to pay for the entire solar
Right.
hot water
Right.
conversion.
Okay, I'm good.
And the homeowner's not paying anything. This is all supported by their funds and with a little bit from us.
Okay, what's the pleasure of the committee?
I'll move the item.
Dr. Burke, I think there's some public comment here.
Hello again. I'm Harvey Etter, speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. I was bushwhacked by this. Last Friday, I tried to get this information for the last month or two. It was mentioned to me briefly by staff. I've got somewhat of a communication problem, as has been evident from the records at board meetings, especially with one staff person. Anyway, there was supposed to be, coming out of this committee, you said a solar initiative, and we did have a few meetings, presented the Solar Equity New Deal, and dozens of points. And there was one meeting of a solar and energy efficiency group. Apparently a couple staff people have been put on this, mostly working on energy efficiency. And that was in August. There's not been anything since then. It's like pulling teeth to get this information. I only got it late yesterday afternoon. And on this, we got the short version. I would like to get the long version. It says on the first page before the committee today, on the second frame, on the bottom it says need $1 million per year over 14 years. So that opens it up to all the incentive programs. And the ones that were cited by staff are total 61 million. I called Community Development Department yesterday, tried to find out what this is about. I had heard a figure from staff of 23 million, now I heard it's 25. I tried to get a copy of the grant, the proposal. It's public money, public information. I'm still not clear whether it's coming from the state or some from the utilities as well. This has to, there's no reason to go sole source on this. It has to be put out to bid. I worked with WLCAC about 30 years ago on a program that was through the gas company, but we did this kind of work. It was not solar, but we were trying to get things to go that way. But it should be done with environmental justice, solar equity, energy democracy, and this should be done. Look at things like co-ops, and also trying to do there was a lot of discussion saying, well, we could convert all of our power plants, staff said, and we still wouldn't get a ton or 2 tons a day. I said, well, if you go to mobile sources, go to the trucks, instead of putting this into natural gas, and where you still got PM and benzene and formaldehyde, carcinogens, toxins, people are dying. With clean solar electric vehicles, solar hydrogen, fuel cell electric vehicles, there are no emissions. Anyway, this should not be passed and should not go to the board in this next meeting. And this group should meet. I brought this up at the meeting.
This quick survey.
I've said the
Yes,
process
yes,
is the process,
yes.
but I don't know. Anyway, I'm pretty upset. Should I just sit down now?
Mr. Chair, may I ask Harvey a question? Harvey, it seems to me that if we go with this, we have to go with the source that has the grant. If these people have already got a $25 million grant, and we're just going to be supplementing that with $500
with
to
$1
go
billion.
out to,
Well, that's 1,200 systems at 500.
I mean,
At $600,000. Right, okay, you know, there are many more systems in this, and this is just for people that happen to own houses. There's the issue of that the roofs are not ready and this greenhouse gas money, and that they should look at options like repairing those roofs and including them in the system. And if you can do a bigger roof, then it could be done like with a neighborhood or a co-op or something like this, and including in financing. We've done a lot of work and study on this, and it was cited in comments on the plan and exhibits that we're litigating on now. And we are putting in a document discussed with legal staff about discovery for that litigation with the district and with CARB now, anyway.
well, my question was to you is that.
They could sub this stuff out. I haven't seen the grant. I don't know what it's for. You know, I guess staff could have shared it, but I tried to get it from Sacramento yesterday, and I did not get a call back on that. They told me they called me this morning. Anyway, there are other ways. I'm not sure what the money's for. Maybe it could be put in complemented in different ways, but just to go with this and to have it rammed through like this is, it stinks. Anyway, I don't think you should pass it. If you do, whatever.
I guess my comment, and I hear what you said, but my comment itself is that all we're talking about is supplementing a grant to incentivize people to go to solar water heaters. They don't have to accept it within their homes, but if they do accept solar, so it's an encouragement to the individual to accept it, the way that I've read it.
Low-income people, maybe what, 10% of them own homes? Vast majority are renters, and these things they are being done here and there, and they have to be looked at and brought to the district, and not just the bias of homeowners. I'm sure this could be worked out, not just a railroad job. We weren't told anything. Apparently this has been at the district since May or the spring of the proposal, and that's what the information that I had, and it was not brought up to the task force, the Solar Energy Efficient Task Force in August. It was totally omitted. There's no excuse for this. Anyway, I got to sit down. I'm sorry. You're going to do what you're going to do, and I'm going to do what I'm doing.
Dr. Fine,
Yes,
what do you have to say about that?
which part?
I think the major part is that it's been here since May and nobody knew anything about it.
Like every item that comes to admin committee, it was, we've been working on it, and then it gets presented to admin committee. It was made available a week ago. I gave Harvey an heads up a week or two ago that this was coming, and I looked for admin committee. There's been there's nothing different than any other type of project we would bring to admin committee. It's not being done today. It still has to go to the full board. It's just we're introducing it like we would any item that would come through admin.
But you did notify him a couple weeks ago.
I had mentioned in passing in the hallway that there was something coming on solar thermal, and he should keep the heads up, and that we were going to admin committee.
And I asked for that information and didn't get it. Anyway.
That's the information.
So,
It wasn't ready until a week ago. You know, it comes out with the package. We were working on it.
does it make any sense, instead of doing a sole source contract, to issue this in an RFP, asking other companies to solicit proposals for solar hot water heaters?
You know, from my perspective, what we're trying to do is to get the deployment of technology. If we go through an RFP process, we're going to be months before we get anywhere. And in the meantime, we're losing the opportunity to team with someone that is already reaching out to homes, is already offering the solar technology. I think for us not to move forward would be the inappropriate action when the board has made clear through the AQMP adoption to try to look at how we can deploy solar technology. This is a way to do that. This is a way to do it fairly quickly, and it's a way to do it in a cooperative, collaborative fashion.
If I could just add, the RFP is actually lists as a specific type of project for other entities doing similar work. They can apply through the RFP. This is just a project that's already underway, and if there was delay, we would lose out on working with them. We'd lose out on many homes that they're already working with.
And this is only a portion of the money that we're dealing with.
It's a very small portion of it.
We're dealing with 61 million, and this is 617,000, so there's other opportunities, I think
Yes,
is what you're
absolutely.
saying to us.
Yes.
There's
So,
4.44 million for mobile.
okay.
Do one more public comment.
Rita would like to comment also, Rita Lufus here.
When I first noticed this item, I had some real questions about it myself. But I think those questions have been answered. And if we go to an RFP, we would, I think, lose the ability to, one, the time frame of these people who already have the grant. And would we then, in the RFP process, require somebody else to have a grant so they could write it down? I think this is probably the best deal for disadvantaged people that you could want. So I'll accept a motion on this item from my colleagues.
Dr. Burke, we have another public commenter.
Okay.
Good morning, Rita Loof with Bradtech International. And I just wanted to speak to the portion related to incentives for stationary sources. We're very appreciative of that. We welcome that opportunity. I attended a workshop yesterday for Rule 1469 where I made similar comments to try to partner with some of these small and medium-sized businesses that are attempting to move away from toxics and implement and make an investment in cleaner technology. So we're really appreciative and we're looking forward to the process. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Bill
I'm
Lamar,
prepared for a motion.
Chairman Burke,
Oh.
Bill Lamar is here.
Oh, Bill, yeah. Oh, no, I will never cut him off. Have a seat, Bill.
Thank you, Dr. Burke. Good morning, I'm Bill Lamar. I'm the Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance, and I guess I'm a little confused here. It says staff proposes issuing a broad program announcement via request for proposals for stationary mobile source emissions. Yet I've been, the conversation has been about weatherization contractors or solar contractors. Is this going to be an announcement to the public for projects? Because you all did that, I think, around 2003 or so after a big refinery settlement. And I submitted a proposal which was approved, and that was $1 million grant for dry cleaners, which was subsequently replenished by a second $1 million. And that was highly successful, so.
The opportunity again, maybe.
Yeah, if there is, we have a number of small business industry segments that are going to be hit very hard economically with rulemaking going forward. And if there's a considerable amount of money, we would welcome the opportunity to participate in this, if we have prior knowledge, of course. Thank you.
Well,
Okay. You got anybody else there?
I believe that's it.
Okay. Then now we can go to a motion.
I'll move the item.
I'll
What is
second.
the pleasure? I'm sorry, the machine went out.
Mayor Benoit moved and I seconded.
And she seconded.
Okay, great. Would the clerk call the roll?
Vice Chair Benoit,
Aye.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes.
Dr. Parker,
Yes.
Dr. Burke,
Yes.
motion passes 4-0.
Okay. Mr. Lowe?
Good morning, Dr. Burke, members of the committee. This item is to recognize revenue in the amount of $70,000 and appropriate for a continued operation of existing sensor network that is located at Rainbow Transfer Recycling Facility in Huntington Beach. And also this expands that network into the neighboring community. I'll take any questions at this time.
So this is what we're already doing.
Yes, so this is already an existing network of 9 sensors that are located at the facility, and we are proposing to recognize money and appropriate for expanding that to maybe an additional 20 or 30 sensors.
When you say the facility?
This is Rainbow Transfer.
And are they paying for this, or we're paying?
Yes, this was a part of a stipulated order of abatement that will be receiving $70,000 for this purpose.
No other questions
Can I
here?
get a motion?
Any public comment?
Move the item.
We have a motion by Dr. Parker.
I'll second.
Can I get the clerk to call the roll?
Vice Chair Benoit?
Aye.
Councilmember Mitchell?
Aye.
Dr. Parker?
Aye.
Dr. Burke?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, the next item from Mr. Gilchrist is a pretty standard item. Can we waive the presentation and get a motion on this item?
I'll move the item.
I'll second. Great presentation.
Can the clerk call the roll, please?
Vice Chair Benoit?
Aye.
Councilmember Mitchell?
Aye.
Dr. Parker?
Aye.
Dr. Burke?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, item 13, Mr. Alatorre.
So good morning, Dr. Burke and committee members. This item is to approve the second and final contract extension for the Lee Andrews Group to coordinate, plan, and execute our Environmental Justice Community Partnership Program. The Environmental Community Justice Community Partnership, it aims to strengthen SCAQMD's relationships with stakeholders in environmental justice communities. To do that, the agency hosts a series of events, which we just had one this past Saturday at the Cathedral in Los Angeles, which both you and Dr. Parker attended. It was a very successful event, and these type of events serve the district as an opportunity for people to express their issues.
Are you good? Dr. Parker, I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Okay. Let me say this before I take the roll on the vote. Also, Larry attended that meeting and did a great job with the Pledge of Allegiance. It's just unbelievable. He gave a little speech before it went, and it was really, really very special. But, you know, what I would like to suggest to you, Mr. Alatorre, is that in past years, we've done seniors events around the district. And we've gotten away from that. And I would like for you to look into doing some of those. I know that the last one we did was down in Riverside, and with Supervisor Benoit. And so, you know, I think we ought to do one or two of those in 2018 on opposite ends of the district. Maybe one in LA County or one down in the Inland Empire or Orange County, wherever they'd like to do that. But I think it's important to communicate these things not only to our children, but to our seniors.
Yes, sir. I'll look into it and report back.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a motion and a second on this item. Will the clerk call the roll?
Vice Chair Benoit?
Aye.
Councilmember Mitchell?
Aye.
Dr. Parker?
Aye.
Dr. Burke?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, item 14.
Yes, sir. This item is to approve the second and final extension for federal consultants. That is Cadiz and Associates, the Carmen Group, and Cassidy and Associates. This extension will cover calendar year 2018. In the past, these three consulting groups have worked with us to partner in Washington, D.C. to not only represent us in the Capitol there, but also to set up meetings with electeds as well as other organizations to help move forward our message and our agenda in Washington DC. This item, again, is to approve the second and last extension. And next year will be, actually, 2018 will be going out for an RFP.
I'll move the item.
I'll
We
second.
have a motion by the chairman of legislative, and we have a second by the chairman of the refinery committee. Would the clerk call the roll?
Vice Chair Benoit,
Aye.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Aye.
Dr. Parker,
Aye.
Dr. Burke,
Aye.
motion passes 4-0.
Any written reports or Environmental Justice Advisory Group minutes? Mr. Alator, you want to note anything for the record?
I'll just keep it short.
Okay. Is there any other matters there in CC8?
No?
Okay, is there any public comment in CC8?
Yes.
Yes.
Is there any public comment? Okay.
Hello, I'm Harvey Eder. I'm speaking for myself and the Public Solar Power Coalition. Besides it just not being right to do this, taking the action on starting the solar program, I want to remind, also there's a process problem here. There were numerous items that you just went and took votes on and asked if there were comments from the public. I believe council corrected board member at the last meeting that there should be public comments on individual items. And on the one for the $10 million and the 617, there should also be meteorological data there, complete for solar and assessing microclimates on all of these low-cost sensors. And that should be worked into the program. The law was broken here. The Brown Act, at least, was broken and continues to be broken. And this needs to be acted upon.
Dr. Burke, if I could explain, during the legislative committee, Mr. Eder mentioned that he wanted to speak on an item on the agenda. And I advised that the members of the public do have the right to address the committee on any agenda item before or during consideration of that item. However, I don't, and he was allowed to speak, and in subsequent items, we did inquire whether there were members of the public who wanted to speak. I don't believe the Brown Act was broken by not specifically asking after each item.
No,
because
this is the other issue that I addressed in my comments specifically to 10 and 11. But that's a question as well that should be brought. We should find out.
I should just mention that the agenda does inform members of the public that they have the right to comment. So if they wish to, they can raise their hands during the item.
The way it proceeded is my right was taken away, you stepped in and restored my right. That's what transpired. There's other things I wanted to say, but I guess we can wait to the board meeting, but we're only limited to 6 minutes there. And I'd like to say that the environmental justice person, Yvonne Watson, that was just elected by the Sierra Club for Angeles, is not here. And there has to be more outreach to environmental justice people and other folks to come to these meetings. I feel partly responsible because I didn't get a hold of her, or anyway, this should be resolved. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
No more public comment.
Very good. No public comment here. We will adjourn the admin committee meeting until January. Everybody have a happy holiday, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you, Dr. Burke.